Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for day one of the HR Daily Advisors HR Recruiting and Talent Acquisition Week. We have a lot of great content to share with you, so I hope you're ready. To kick off this week, we have an engaging panel discussion geared up for you today: the future of recruiting, from technology to trends to today's best practices. This panel is sponsored by Eightfold. Today's session has been approved for both HRCI and SHRM recertification credits, and we will announce those at the close of the session, how you're able to obtain those codes. So let's get into some housekeeping items and introductions. My name is Madeline Collins from Simplify Media and an editor at HR Daily Advisor, and I'll be here as your moderator for today's session. The console that you're looking at right now offers multiple application widgets that you can use. There's a widget called the Media Player widget, which will allow you to control the volume of today's session. Please note that there is no dial-in number for attendees, and the audio is streaming directly from your computer speakers, so be sure they're turned up and on. You don't want to miss any part of today's session. However, if you do miss parts of our session, we're recording today's session and it will be sent out via email in about 24 hours. If you experience any type of technical difficulty, please feel free to let us know in the Q&A widget on the bottom of your screen, and I'll be happy to assist you. And speaking of that widget, our presenters are eager to hear from you. We'll be hosting a live Q&A session at the end of this presentation, so please feel free to submit any questions that you have on the topic at any point throughout today's event. We'll be getting to as many as we can at the end. Please also note that there's a free resource widget. Sorry, Michelle, cut that line because I think that's from a previous one. Okay. All right, without further ado, I'd like you to please join me in welcoming our guest speakers to the floor today. We have Michael Watson, Director of Global Customer Evangelism at Eightfold AI, Da Bologna, PhD, HR Senior Director at Procter & Gamble, and Whitney Wilbur, Global Head of Employer Brand at BNY Mellon. Michael, Da, and Whitney, thank you all for joining me with this panel.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation. So to kind of kick off the topic, what recruiting trends should HR leaders keep an eye on in 2024?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. I think from an employer brand perspective, it's really leaning into authenticity. That's huge right now. Keeping your audiences in mind around your storytelling plan and transparency in the recruiting process, what to expect. Understanding employee experiences and really aligning it to your employer value proposition, your EVP, and for your brands and teams to show up with social accountability and consistency across their talent-facing channels. And the topic of trends and keeping your audiences in mind, in 2025, the Gen Z labor force participation will outpace baby boomers for the first time. So it's being mindful of these generational shifts in talent pools and really leaning into how content is consumed by talent and what their preferences are by generation. I believe that forming human-centered storytelling and for HR and talent acquisition and employer brand teams to really craft these messages together and share these excellent proof points around values that talent audiences, especially Gen Z, really care about, leaning into themes such as belonging and inclusion, growth, passion-driven work, and really trust that these employers instill in them early on. These all rank high as important company values for an employer to really demonstrate. So there's a clear linkage here for potential talent that's exploring your company, your employer, and also a retention lever for current employees seeking that further connection across their teams and the work.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Whitney just said, and to add a few more additional trends that I'm seeing. I think we need to also call out. I mean, especially ever since COVID. I mean, the nature of hybrid work, what candidates are expecting from potential employers in regards to remote work opportunities, flexible work arrangements, things like that, is constantly evolving. It seems like once you think you figured it out and understand what your potential candidates are looking for, it starts to evolve some more. So really keeping an ear to the ground and knowing what your candidates are looking for in regards to hybrid work and how that aligns to your greater company strategies, whether business strategy, talent strategy, things like that, is going to be a focus for a lot of employers within this year. Another big bucket I would point out would be with skills. This one isn't as complicated to talk through. A lot of HCMs or different softwares are pushing skills. A lot of consultants are pushing skills. And so being skills focused, understanding your job descriptions and your work in regards to skills, understanding your talent in regards to skills is a big area of focus that I've seen. An additional one would be general AI and data privacy. And when I say AI, it's just shorthand for tech or math, really. So anything that involves any sort of technology or any sort of like analytics or predictive analytics is being put under high scrutiny, not only from legal bodies, but also from candidates. So they want increased transparency on what are you looking at, why are you looking at, what decisions are being made off of these things. And it's not like there's one big body who's putting together kind of like the global standards. A lot of these things are being put forward by states or universities or even cities are putting together their own laws. And so staying close to that, making sure you understand what is in outside of scope in regards to AI and data privacy with your candidates is really critical. And then the last one I'll point out is, and this one's extremely complicated and could probably be its own topic, is the evolving landscape of E&I. So whether it be recent affirmative action cases in the U.S. and other changes within the DE&I space is forcing companies to continue to look at how they assess candidates and how they look at diversity within their talent acquisition strategy.
That's a really good point. And along the theme of DE&I, I think it's also reframing your employer value proposition focus from, not just what we do as teams and as companies to give our employees, these rewards and benefits or showing up and doing the right thing and being on the right side of history, but it's the why, explaining the why through our EVP and the positive impact on our people's lives and the lives of potential talent considering you. I think it's really important and really based on the maturity of your employer brand program, it's really ensuring your HR teams are informed and aware of the value of strong employer brand, how it can positively impact your organization, and leaning also into more exploration of employee advocacy programming, brand ambassador programs, really sparking that shared experience, and building trust across the talent markets for talent audiences that you're looking to attract, and weaving in those important themes that are important for talent audiences when exploring and considering you as an employer.
Definitely. That's really well said, you guys. Shifting on to our next question. How are HR professionals using data analytics and metrics to make informed decisions in the recruitment process? And what impact does this have on overall business outcomes?
Yeah, I think I think I'm on the hook to jump on this one first. So I think the big one, and there's a few, but like the big one for me, and so I'm an industrial and organizational psychologist by trade, and so I wouldn't be doing justice if I didn't start with pre-hire assessments. So if you're not familiar with these, you can think of like the MCAT or the ACT or the SAT, but for companies, right? So you can build an assessment for your company. If your candidate pool is big enough and you have the ability to do this, definitely do so. And so how this relates to business outcomes is when you build these assessments, you do it in a way that ensures those who pass the assessment are more likely to be higher performers, higher potential within the organization. And so it literally segments your candidate pool into these individuals are more likely to be successful, and these individuals are less likely to be successful within our organization based off of our competency model and other things. It also, if done right, can help you lead to less adverse impact, right? So you're able to quantify kind of your entire selection system and look at different parts of the selection process that may be contributing to different types of adverse impact. You can remove the ones that lead to higher adverse impact and keep the ones that lead to less. It sounds simple, but it's obviously a lot more complicated than that. So the easiest and the one with the most data and science behind it would certainly be pre-hire assessments. But over the last, I would say, I don't know, 5 to 15 years, HR analytics and talent acquisition has absolutely exploded. And so there's all sorts of other areas where you can leverage analytics to make more informed data-based hiring decisions. Source tracking analytics has come a long way. So looking at when you source from campus, which campuses do you tend to show up well? It's not as simple as going to the quote unquote better schools because, and I'm getting into Whitney's space, your employer brand just may be stronger at another school. So you're able to get the top talent at a tier 2 school, whereas at a tier 1 school, you're getting kind of the bottom of the barrel. And so these source tracking analytics, and sometimes they're in Excel or Power BI or whatnot, allow you to really look at your funnel and make more informed decisions where you're going to get more ROI. So when you send a campus team to go recruit, they're actually going to the schools that are going to get you top talent, diverse talent that fits a profile that you're looking for. I would also add kind of a few others that I'm not as familiar with as those two. Websites are getting extremely advanced. We're able to curate content to where, based off of a candidate's, geo-tracking or their brief interactions with the chatbot, we're able to push them customized content. And so all of that data is working in the background to make sure that candidate's more likely to see what they want to see and more likely to have a positive view of you and your company. I mentioned chatbots briefly. That's pretty simple. And then the last one I'll touch on is augmented writing tools. These are really cool and seem to be really promising. They're early. Most of them are only a few years in existence. But essentially, these tools can analyze your job descriptions and tell you, are you using biased language? Are you more likely to have men or women or equal between both genders to apply to your positions, and actually gives you recommendations on small language changes you can make to increase overall applications as well as applications from a certain demographic profile. And so it helps you kind of remove bias from the system where it can kind of hide without your knowing. So those are some ways that I've seen analytics work really well within the talent acquisition. They're not all fully baked. I would say pre-hire assessments is the one that's an exception. But the other ones, we're learning a lot, and there seems to be a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, and kind of going hand in hand with the concept of analytics comes the tools that go with it, a couple of which you've mentioned. So as AI in particular becomes more prevalent in the recruiting process, what ethical considerations should HR professionals keep in mind to ensure fairness, transparency, and compliance with regulations?
Yeah, Maddie, I'm happy to take this one. I think, right, you mentioned 3 components there. You have compliance, fairness, and transparency. So let's start with, I think, is probably the easiest of these 3, which would be compliance. Mm-hmm. Compliance is coming. Regulation is coming, right? The Biden administration has announced a task force a few months back, and I think a week ago, their Office of Management and Budgeting also came out with policy around governance and risk. So regulation in this field is definitely coming. So I think when we're looking at vendors and we're looking for companies like Eightfold, are they open to regulation? Are they opening up? Now, they're not going to open up our IP, but are we going to be forthcoming about how our algorithms are working and what they're trying to solve for? I think is really critical when making some of these decisions. Now, that leads me to fairness, right? I think when you look at AI companies and you look at some companies that have gotten in trouble in the past, right? They've gotten into trouble because the size of their data sets weren't robust enough. And if you're only strictly using your data set in an AI model, it's inherently rife with bias. So, one of the things that we talk about at Eightfold and is really a common best practice for any AI company out there is the larger your data set and the more different sources your data is coming from, the more it kind of works bias out of the system, right? So when you look at our model, for instance, we ingest your data, we ingest publicly available data, and then we're also modeling that, and we remove all the PI, obviously, but we're also modeling that against all of our other customers' data. So we have over 1.5 billion data points to help us distill down to our AI model and our recommendation engines, right? And that's very, very robust. And that's how you can help remove some of the bias from your organization is taking some of your data and looking at that versus trends in your field, outside of your industry, across the globe. And that helps drive fairness. Now, as far as transparency, yeah, any organization you work with in the AI space should be open to this, right? They should have plenty of spots on their websites where they're talking about fairness and transparency. And if they're not willing to do that with you during the process, I would really urge you to take a step back and talk to some other vendors, because this is a really key component, right? There's so much talk around AI right now, and I think there's some things that are just, and I think there's some things that are hyperbole, and I think some things have gotten out of control. When you look at it from an HR perspective, right, we should be using this to really level the playing field, right? Well, one of the things we talk about at Eightfold in fairness is, in a perfect world, we'd love to get rid of the resume, right? What do we care what school you went to? Do you have the skills we're looking for to do this job or not? Right. And I always think back to, my parents were both in the military. They didn't have formal 4-year careers. But they went in the military, they came out, they found jobs. They'd struggle in today's world. They're in their 80s now. So when we talk about fairness and transparency, right, what we try to do is we try to level that playing field and say, okay, whether you went to Cal State University or Stanford, that's great, but let's look at the skills you have. Let's look at how you've used those skills in the past. Let's look at some of those skills adjacencies. And that's where AI really comes into help, is not just looking at the written word and the written resume, but looking behind the curtain. So, when you talk about all of those components, whether it's compliance, we know that that's happening. Whether it's fairness, I think the robust data sets is really what helps. And then transparency, making sure you're working with a vendor that explains, hey, this is how our AI is working. Here's how we're driving fairness, right? We're using equal opportunity algorithms. We're removing PI. We're only looking at skills and data and job titles. All of those things should go into your decisions when talking to vendors and trying to scope out which AI solution is right for you in the HR space.
Yeah, quickly, Matt, if you don't mind, quick build on what Michael said. Completely agree with everything he said, but two quick additional points. First is I would highly recommend partnering with legal and/or IO psychologists if you have them. They're going to help shortcut some of the things that Michael was outlining. And then second, and again, I kind of made the tongue-in-cheek joke earlier that AI is shortcut for tech or math. But these decisions are being made by individuals who don't necessarily understand some of the things that Michael started to get into, like what actually is behind AI. And because of that, what I've at least seen is AI kind of raises the bar for ethics and compliance and transparency. A lot of those things that were behind this question. I mean, there's a famous Fortune 500 story from a few years ago where they built a resume scraping technology, a resume scoring technology. And the reason they decided not to launch it was because it had bias in it, because it was built off of the decisions they've been making. So
That's right.
I think the loud message behind that I think a lot of people missed is the tool was the exact same as the people, but the tool was not okay to move forward with, and they kept doing the work with the people. So I think it's a really clear example of when we think about ethics, when we think about compliance, when we think about transparency, for whatever reason, AI seems to have a higher bar versus individual people-based decision-making that we've been doing for a long time.
Yeah, and just to add on that, right, Craig Lean, who used to be the former commissioner of the OFCCP, is on record as saying is if you want to remove bias, you should be using AI. Now, it depends on the models you're using, right? You want to use the ones that use these large data sets to remove this bias. But to Daw's point, the bias is in the recruiter, and we're not saying you're maliciously sitting there and making decisions based off of race, gender, I mean, if you have people in that like that in your organization, you need to get rid of them as fast as you can. But we all have these implicit biases that we don't even realize that we have. And that's where using AI comes in to normalize those large data sets to say, hey, look, whether you know this or not, this is how you've been leveraging the data, and this is some of the biases, and this is where we can kind of help smooth out those curves and make sure you're doing what you can to mitigate the bias. So you're 100% correct, right? Team up with your IO psychologist, team up with your legal teams, make sure everyone knows what your intentions are, how you're trying to use this, and be clear communicators, both internally and externally. It's really important.
Yeah. So we've focused so far on two huge branches within the recruiting space, which is like DEI and the technology available to that. So to shift on to another branch that we haven't really discussed yet, what role does providing learning and development opportunities have on employee retention, as that's something that a lot of candidates are looking for in this market?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. I think it's an interesting piece. Really since the pandemic, we've seen a trend where employers have had to move quickly to find more competitive advantages to really attract candidates into their organizations. And it's also become more of an expectation from candidates, I believe, when exploring employers and other job opportunities, to have continuous learning and development already as an option, not just for early career audiences as well. So I believe when HR and L&D teams are exploring L&D programs, it's identifying a platform and an experience that is accessible for all and flexes to different learning styles, really making learning fun and easy and engaging, with multiple media formats and team collaboration. Really ensuring the platform for learning is intuitive, easy to find training content, share content, on top of making it collaborative for teams and for sharing courses with one another, right? Along with, just the process overall being collaborative and fun, and value back to the individual as a reward, essentially. And I believe L&D programming can really benefit an organization because it's creating an environment where people take ownership of what they want to learn, what they want to learn more about. There's an empowerment aspect here that's an important nod to owning your own development, but giving individuals the tools and flexibility to take it at their own pace. I think this overall can spark, again, employee connectivity, right? Shared interests, shared learnings, as well as a feeling of being welcome and invited in to participate. It's really a retention lever that matters. And I think as a communicator, it's also a really important element with L&D programming is communicating back the clear benefits, the rewards, the successes that your employer brand and comms teams can help build out these success stories and this positive employee sentiment around these types of programming. It's really a proof point within your EVP to promote the experience of your people to candidates, because they really expect to receive this, when they come on board.
Definitely. And I feel like it goes back to an idea that we've been bouncing around for a lot of this conversation, is just the fact that it's about the people. It's about building that connection with your candidates. It's about keeping your people making hiring decisions accountable and ethical. So as technology is integrated into recruiting strategy and recruiting practices, how can hiring teams marry the human first experience with that technology?
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind for me here, and I don't want to seem like I'm just full of cliches here, right, is the old win-win cliche, right? But I do think that it's appropriate here, right? You want to look for a solution that helps your candidates, makes it easier for them to apply, makes it very, very clear on what about their background is a good fit for what they're looking for, or from the TM side, what in their background would make them a great fit for a role that maybe they hadn't even considered. And let's use the AI and the L&D to look at your background and understand some of the skills that you might not possess currently. And then let's map out some things for you. So from the candidate perspective, that's the win. I think from internally, for the companies and the recruiters and the talent management folks and the HR business partners using this, is our win there is we want to make our jobs easier, right? And this takes me back to this old analogy. My grandfather, as a little kid, had the coolest job ever. He supplied video games to arcades. So here I am, a 10-year-old kid, and every time I'd go to my grandfather's house, he'd have different arcade games in his garage. And he was fixing them, right? And he had this instrument in there called an oscilloscope. And what the oscilloscope does is it separates the signal from the noise. And once I was here at Eightfold for about six months, it hit me. Like, what we are trying to do, what we are using Eightfold for, is we're separating the signal from the noise, right? The noise, if on the TA side, is the thousands and thousands of people that apply to your jobs. And we all know, as for us recruiters on the call, there's many nights that I'm sourcing resumes on my couch, and it takes me 5 or 6 clicks to finally get to a resume, to look at it, to know very, very quickly, this person is not even a remote fit for my position. Might be a great person, might be a great fit for something else, but for what I was trying to source for that night and that evening, I would have been better off to not even look at that resume and focus on the ones that were the right fit. And that's what I mean by separating the signal from the noise. If we can use AI to look at these vast amounts of data and help us focus in on where we should focus our time first, to me, that's the win on the corporate side or the company side. It's helping me focus my time and my efforts and spend my energy where I need to spend it. And that's the folks that have the skills and have the likelihood to be successful. Like, that's where I should be spending my time. And when you do that right and you do it correctly, what you end up doing is you end up getting more work-life balance back to your teams, right? Because now I can get through my sourcing, I can get through my regular day by using the help of AI, where traditionally I just ran out of time with all my Zoom meetings and in-person meetings and collecting feedback and interviews and wrangling down hiring managers to show up. All of those things cut into your time. So if I can use an AI solution to help get through my day much faster and identify where I need to be spending my time, that's where I couple that win-win together, right? We're doing the right thing for the candidate and the internal mobility folks by really highlighting to them why they're a great fit, why they would work out for this position, or what they maybe need to take to be a great fit, while also giving that win to the folks on the other side of the table by increasing their work-life balance and freeing up some of that heavy load of just time-eating work that we can better use AI to help us with.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like that flows into the next question kind of well too, because AI, it has that nice technical aspect to reduce that noise, like you said. And part of reducing that noise is attracting the right talent in the first place. So how does employer branding influence recruiting strategy? And what are some best practices there to put your best foot forward?
One of the first things I like to do when I'm speaking with talent acquisition team members and coming on board and trying to build a new employer brand program and understanding kind of what's working, what's broken, what can be improved upon and at different levels, is asking the question of, when was the last time you applied for a job at your own company? What was your experience? And really placing them within the candidate's position, right? Reviewing the experience across not only your applicant tracking system, whichever platform or experience you may be creating or using, but really analyzing it from the start of multiple candidate touch points, from your website, from your job boards, your CRM, looking at it through various social channels that you may be promoting roles and careers, or any job distribution point you have, to understand all the elements that really go into that candidate experience, and understanding what mass audience opportunities does the employer brand and recruitment marketing teams have to improve upon. What's going to give you the most global impact and improvements at one time. And then taking a look at it really from the next piece, which is a targeted strategic approach. What are the experiences you're trying to build, and the messaging that you're trying to share and get through to your candidates with your various targeted audiences. This is an exercise that can really pinpoint areas for improvement around communications, keep warm strategies, points to share storytelling and really make that human connection, and provide just helpful guidance to really lower candidate anxiety, right? Take away the uncertainty of the recruiting process, right? And really calm nerves, create these powerful moments where your values, your principles can be felt and experienced before or after applying, regardless of the hiring outcome. So that's one place I like to begin when thinking through the recruiting experience. And the next piece that I'm really passionate about when it comes to building strong employer brand programs is recruiter enablement. Going back to the basics. I think no matter where you are on your team, if you have a mature employer brand program, if you're just starting, it really starts with leaning into the basics. That is the foundation strong, and that's ensuring that your people, who are the face of your organization, your talent acquisition team members, are equipped and feel comfortable and confident in speaking to who you are, what you do, telling your story to these candidates to help them understand and really envision themselves with your organization. So recruiter enablement, ensuring they have the right talking points, they have the right toolkit, and that they're able to really express the true behaviors and principles and values of your organization as they're connecting with talent and really attracting them into your organization. And I think the third piece that's really important for me is digging into the data. What's your data landscape look like? What are your KPIs? And really having some conversations, and not just within your employer brand team, but bringing in talent acquisition, bringing in people team, bringing in your analytics team, your people analytics team, ensuring that you become best friends and really understanding what data is available. So that you can collect it, you can use it to make informed decisions on how you can either improve the candidate experience and support talent acquisition as your customer, and then you can actually pair it with your recruitment marketing strategies, connect the dots to the data that you own around content, EVP messaging, posts, that content styles that your talent audiences most engage with, so that you can create as successful outcomes as possible, and apply as much pixel tracking, source code data to anything and everything, so that you can really analyze these journeys and experiences that you're creating for talent, and do more of what you're successful at, and then go back to the drawing table and pilot something new if it didn't give you the results that you were looking for.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, right? Before I joined Eightfold, the first 25 years of my career were on the recruiting side, and I remember a stat, and this was prior to me joining Eightfold. So within the last 5 years, that 70% of the folks that apply to your jobs have done hours worth of research on you and know that they want to work there before they've even applied to a job. So going back to this point, right, if we do employer branding correctly, that helps us on the TA side get to this nirvana of 0 days to hire. And what I mean by that is if we're engaging, we have YouTube channels, we're sharing not just about, hey, we got this job, but hey, here's some the philanthropic work we're doing as an organization. Here's some houses we built for Habitat for Humanity. Here's a blog post. It was recognizing women, I think last month. So, highlighting some of the successful women in your organization. Like when you're doing that, all of a sudden, those candidates that are sitting on the other side of the computer thinking about applying to you, all of a sudden they're like, I see myself there. I can see myself in that organization because the things they're talking about are the things that are important to me. So all of a sudden they apply, you're using AI to match them. So they're matching real well to a job coming in. It gets to a point where by the time they get to a recruiter, the recruiter has one conversation with them, and then they're reaching out to their hiring manager and saying, hey, I have your next hire. Right? It's Whitney here. Let me go ahead and set you up for a call. And so that is a marriage made in heaven, if you will. Employer branding and TA and recruiting, if done right, it will really drive some tremendous efficiencies in your organization.
Well said.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more. So with what we've talked about, with making sure that your employee branding is putting forward what you believe in as a company and that your technology is there to find the candidates who also align with those values. How can HR teams enhance the candidate experience throughout that recruiting process, from the application to onboarding? And what role does technology play in that journey as well?
Sure. So I think I'm up first to take this one, and sorry, I had some brief technology issues there. Hopefully my internet's good for now. So I think there's a few different ways that companies can enhance the candidate experience through the recruitment process. I think perhaps the simplest one, and it's related to some of the things that were said earlier, is speed. So time to fill, time to hire is not just a company metric. It's also something candidates are looking for. They want to get to a decision if they're on the job market, whether they're in school or they've had, maybe an experience at their employer that made them start looking for a job. They're going through companies really, really quickly. They're applying to a lot of companies typically. And so they want to get to a decision as fast as possible so that they can move to the next company. But they also want to feel like they were actually considered and feel that it was a fair process. So making sure that they feel like they were properly vetted, they were able to kind of flex and show their skills and be actually considered is important as well. But being faster in that process can be viewed as candidate experience. There's also a lot of work with branding that Whitney can maybe get into, but also like gamification, making the process a little bit more fun. I've seen mixed results. I've seen cases where that's really well received. I've seen cases where it comes across a little too silly, a little too gamified, and not serious enough for the professional workplace. That also goes back to your brand as an employer too. So, for example, Michael mentioned gaming and arcades earlier. If you're that type of company, then maybe it does make sense to be highly gamified. It's somewhat of a preview for what it may be like to work to that company. The last thing I would say is really think about expanding what you consider to be and not be recruiting within the space of recruiting. And I can bring up an example of this. So pre-hire assessments and kind of CSR or social responsibility aren't usually connected. But we had a case where we were getting a lot of pressure to give candidates feedback on their assessments. And so here's how you scored, here's how you did, here's what you can improve on, here's what you did really well on. When we looked into this, we found that that wasn't a good decision for us. So you basically unpacked how the assessment was scored. Candidates had mixed results with how they reacted to that type of feedback, and it didn't make a lot of sense. So we thought, could we connect this with kind of more of a bigger company strategy? Long story short, we connected it with a technology that we had created that basically creates a liter of clean drinking water for children in need. And so we ended up with a situation where after you took our assessments, we said, as a thank you for you investing your time in us as an employer, we've donated a liter of clean drinking water to children in need on your behalf. follow this link to learn more. And so you give, arguably for many candidates, is the worst part of the recruitment process, is going through the assessments. You give them a little positive moment. You give them an opportunity to learn more about your company, and you get them a chance to see kind of what your company's about, right? So it's a way to say, hey, at XYZ company, this is what we do, this is what we're about. Maybe it may make sense for you to work at a company like this in the future. And so I think really expanding the boundaries between recruitment and talent management and L&D we got into, but even outside of HR, those are coming down with how quickly we can flow information. And so I think thinking about what opportunities are outside of the space of what we would call traditional recruitment is an opportunity for numerous companies.
Yeah, I agree. And we had touched on this earlier, sorry, bringing it back around full circle. We talked about DEI initiatives and how to incorporate that into a fair, equitable recruiting process earlier in this conversation. So what strategies are organizations adopting to foster diversity and inclusion in their recruitment processes? And how does that impact overall workplace culture?
Yeah, I think from a recruitment marketing perspective, one thing that I always recommend talent acquisition teams lean into is and a powerful place to begin is really from a global mass audience perspective is your global job posting strategy and your global job posting templates. In terms of how your job descriptions are crafted and written, it's really important and it matters, right? Research shows that most candidates encounter job postings first before researching your employer website, your social media handles, or seeking out review-based job boards. On average, candidates use the first 14 seconds to really determine if a job posting is even worth reading. 14 seconds or more quickly than that. And from a diverse talent perspective, I think that data tells us that women typically only applies to a role if they meet 100% of the listed criteria. This is an HP study that was done that's noted by many groups. And when compared to men who typically apply for roles when they meet about 60%. So if we're thinking about ways to self-select in and encourage talent to raise their hand and apply to roles, it's really starting with the way that we're crafting and writing these job descriptions and using a standardized approach to the templates. Leaning into a strategy that encourages diverse talent to not select out is a great way to think about your DE&I approaches to your roles and how they're positioned. Encouraging posting language that is inclusive. And I think Daw hit on this earlier. There are paid solutions around us and in the market that can do this for us that are very slick and sharp. And there's also free tools that you can test language from a masculine and feminine leaning perspective to better train recruiters and hiring managers and bring awareness to the words that they use hold power, and that we should be seeking out a balanced approach to the words and the phrasing. And I think this is a strong recruiter enablement play that any organization can move forward with, regardless of your budget constraints or your size, that will positively impact your recruiting process, your talent pools, and ultimately support your hiring goals.
Yeah, if I can add to that real quick. One thing that we're also seeing is this front loading of diverse candidates from the moment the requisitions opened. So intentionally adding women to the interview scheduling, intentionally adding people of color and impacted communities to the front of the hiring process. Now, right, I think even when companies are doing that, I think the messaging still has to come from the top, right? You'll get some managers that push back on you and they're like, why are we doing this? But when the message comes down from the board of directors and the message is coming down from the CEO and the CHRO, and we're talking about why it's important to us as an organization, right? And we can point to studies that show that companies that embrace DE&I, their profit gains and their profitability is 10x. Some of the companies that don't. So, we can prove that it has a financial positive impact on the organization, as well as just doing the right thing. I think we all want to work for a company, at least I do in my age, that does the right thing, right? I want to be a part of an organization like that. So, a lot of customers I'm seeing right now are using AI to front load the front of that funnel with diverse candidates, trying to have an impact on what's coming out the back end with hires.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really well said. And since we are approaching the tail end of our conversation, we can go ahead and shift over into the question and answer portion. So for anyone in our audience who wants to submit some questions, go ahead and pop that in the Q&A widget on your screen. So we actually already had a couple come in. So one question that we had is, what has changed relative to best practices for talent acquisition? And basically, what best practices should people continue to adopt and keep with their strategy?
Sure, I can get us going with one. So I think one of the biggest best practices that I've seen evolve quite a bit in my tenure is the opportunity area within digital, just generally. So social media, LinkedIn, different digital platforms. Candidates are going there more and more. I mean, you think about, I think Michael brought up like Grant. You think about, decades ago, going door to door with your resume, and maybe I'm going too far back with that reference, but those kind of networking relationships are still important, but there's faster movement in the talent marketplace than I think in the past. And so candidates are figuring out ways to show up digitally to apply quickly into a large scope of potential employers. I'm not saying that going to campus or networking or social events or conferences aren't important. I'm saying that in some of those environments where we used to not think were as important, or you didn't get to see enough of the candidate, there's more and more success occurring in those environments. So that's a best practice that I've noticed kind of change over the last maybe decade or so.
Yeah, I think one that I've seen, and that as a former TA director and someone who's in charge of global TA programs, we had this mantra of, we want to recruit people the way we want to be recruited. I don't want to apply to a job that's just a black hole and I never hear back from anybody. I don't want to go through an interview process to never hear back from somebody. Now I understand, we might not, give you exactly what you did, where you tripped up, right? We might give you a, hey, we appreciate your time and efforts, and it's not quite right. So I'm not saying to go that far, but to get back to people, to let them know, like, hey, we appreciate your time. It wasn't quite right. But just no longer ghosting people, no longer applying to companies where you never hear back. You never get a, hey, thank you for applying, or, we reviewed your resume, it wasn't right. I think one of the best practices that I employed and that I see a lot of our customers using is the mantra around, we recruit people the way we want to be recruited, right? If you've interviewed, and I tell you that, hey, I'm waiting for feedback from a hiring manager, I'll give you a call by Friday, and then Friday rolls around and I still don't have that feedback for a hiring manager, I still need to give you a call. I still need to, pick up the phone and say, hey, told you I'd give you a call on Friday. Here's that call. Unfortunately, I don't have the feedback yet. But little things like that go so far as building a strong brand in the market as a place that people want to interview and work for, right? So, goes back to the old adage, treat people the way you want to be treated, right? Recruit people the way you want to be recruited, right? Lots of communication, shoot them straight. Don't keep them hanging. Don't overpromise for things you can't deliver. But that's a huge best practice that I'm seeing that I also use myself.
And just to add on to this, I know I mentioned it early around the topic of authenticity, but I think it's showing up with your people in as much realness as possible. One way to easily do this is across your recruitment marketing collateral and your assets, what you're equipping your global talent acquisition teams and your recruiters with to help sell and share and tell your story. Ensure that it's representative of your people, right? That it's your people, your office environments. Lean into photo shoots, lean into testimonials, lean into building a strong employer brand. It all starts with trust and realness. So that authenticity really matters, and it can be done on a small scale with some big impact. It's something that anyone can pick up and just apply to their recruitment marketing strategies in supporting talent acquisition globally.
Just to add an exclamation point on that, completely agree with what Whitney just said. I remember a couple of years ago when our employer brand lead showed me some assets, and I remember my reaction was, "You looks like you just did this on an iPhone," and his reaction was, "Yeah, exactly. That's the point. It comes across more genuine. It's more authentic." We actually have our employees, literally, we just say, here's the prompt, take pictures, show candidates the reality, because our data suggests the candidates like it. And also it's a realistic job preview. So they don't get here and they're expecting something different. So completely agree. And I'm not as well versed in the employer branding area, but I've seen it tangentially quite a bit.
Well, and also, to your point, it aligns with the content that talent's already digesting. I mean, we have social media that we're following. We're always in our feeds. So realistic clips and video content and day in the life stories and testimonials and photos, that's what we're sharing all day, and that's what we're used to seeing. So talent can spot, something that's misaligned and fake from a mile away.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and that idea of, talent being able to identify when things aren't as they're presented brings us into one of the other Q&A questions really well, which is, how do you get the correct talent for the position? How do you make sure that they are right for the job description, right for the team, and right for the overall company culture? Skills-wise, personality-wise, everything that goes into making the right hire.
That is $1 million question, and I wish I could sit here and tell you I did it right every single time. You could check off all those boxes and still have some misalignment at times, right? You obviously want to mitigate it, but I think to all the points we made earlier, like Daw was talking about assessments up front, right? Are we using the right assessments? Are we identifying what success looks like in our organization and looking for that elsewhere, right? We know these skills are what it takes to be successful here. We know these traits are what it takes to be successful here. Are we also looking for those? Understanding who you are as an organization and what it takes to be successful, I think goes a long way with that. But I'll tell you this, if we had this 100% correct all the time, we wouldn't have to do a lot of recruiting. It would be a lot of TM and internal mobility work, keeping our best people, because we wouldn't have attrition at, I think average attrition is between 15 and 20%. So, until I see that global number move, we definitely have some work here to do. And I wish I had a magic pill or a magic solution to give the audience that says, do this and it'll be fixed. I think doing your due diligence on identifying the right people based on what works for you, not what works for a company down the street or one of your competitors, but what works for you, I think is the first place to start.
Yeah, I agree with what Michael's saying. I think the first thing before, because I had a lot of thoughts to this question. So the first thing is it's statistics and probability, right? It's all about putting the odds as much in your favor as possible. So increasing the likelihood that you're going to have a good fit and a great hire. That's the mindset you have to go with. Even if you do everything right, there's still a X% chance that you're going to have a mishire for whatever reason. There's also possibility you do everything wrong and still have a great hire, but you want to make sure you want to build consistency in that. And so that's why it's important to go through a lot of the best practices. The shortcut answer that I mentioned briefly earlier is just hire an IO psychologist. Have an IO psychologist on your team that's going to be thinking about this and has been trained in this area. But some of the best practices for maximizing your chance to hire the best talent, IO psychologists would say start with a job analysis. And basically all that means is make sure you understand the work, you understand the role, and you understand the jobs to be done. That way you know the profile you're going to go out for, right? So now you understand what you're looking for. And then using best practices like actually validated assessments. So not like tell me your leadership style and just seeing if you like what they say, but actually using validated assessments.
Oh, we might have lost Daw.
I wasn't sure if that was me, my system, or Daw. And I know he had some weather systems rolling through earlier. So he might be caught in the middle of a thunderstorm right now.
Yeah. But with Daw unfortunately cut off mid response. Whitney, do you have anything you wanted to add to this question?
Yeah, I think one thing that is helpful for me as I'm brought in and brought to the table and take seat, the questions that I start to ask of talent acquisition and to dig a bit deeper into the problem that we're trying to solve, which is normally how can we hire talent in these locations for these roles, this function, is really trying to collect as much data as possible, right? And I'm not to create analysis paralysis, but to really be informed of the problem that we're trying to solve and how can we best approach with a recruitment marketing strategy, from my perspective, to attract talent into these roles, right? It's to Daw's point, it's I've partnered closely with an IO psychologist in the past, and it was incredibly helpful and eye-opening, and adds additional perspective into the process. But it's collecting and understanding market availability within the area, right? Because I think it's being we have to be realistic, right, with who we're trying to hire and for which roles, right? It's being mindful of the people data, right? It's being mindful of our value proposition for the audience, which EVP attributes are most important to that particular talent audience type. It's taking into account all the different factors, distribution channels, which channels is this audience most active on and within, right? So it's approaching it from kind of multiple spokes to get the outcome that we're seeking. But that's one place I begin, is with the data.
Yeah, and Daw, I know you probably had some weather-related issues. Did you want to finish the point you were making?
I don't know exactly when I cut out, but basically, I think I was ending on a multiple hurdled approach. So ensuring that you have more than one step in your process. Candidates can have great days, they can have bad days, and if you ensure that you have multiple steps in your process, you have different ways of looking at the candidate, right? So there is a resume review, there is an interview, there is an assessment. Those types of things help you look at the full picture of the candidate, and also helps you mitigate against cheating as well, right? So I can write on my resume that I went to Harvard. That's possible to do. There's ways to cheat on certain assessments. There's ways to gain kind of interviews. And so by having those multiple approaches, it helps you see the whole candidate and makes it less likely that somebody can get through with some nefarious practices. But yeah, sorry about the internet issues. There's a pretty big storm here, and I think I keep getting kicked out.
It's okay. We've been rolling with the punches, as have you. And as we're approaching this end of time, do any of y'all have some final comments or advice to the recruiters in our audience that you'd like to impart?
Yeah, I'll go real quick. I think you've heard a few of us talk about it, but being intentional, right? Really looking for those win-wins where you're serving the job seeker and the candidates and giving them a great experience while also giving the tools and the technology to your teams to do less with more. I mean, there's one thing I think we can all agree on is those of us in HR, we're constantly being asked to cut budget. You know, I think every year, you know, we go through these exercises, September, October, and we'd finalize on our budget. And then all of a sudden the CHRO would come back to me and be like, Mike, I need you to cut off another $1 million, $500,000, whatever it was, depending on the size of your organization. So, you know, try to leverage technology to do less or to do more with less is some of the parting thoughts I'd have.
And from my perspective, I would just say lean into authenticity as much as possible. When it comes to collecting data, both qualitative and quantitative, around forming your employer value proposition or segmented messaging, I think it's leaning into true lived experiences so that you can accurately reflect and tell the story of what a potential candidate could expect if they bring their skill set and their abilities to your organization. So having realistic, authentic EVPs that are not everything for everyone, but realistically present the experience that you know that they will have.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of something different from the things we've said so far. So I think maybe two things come to mind, and I think they're pretty quick. So first would be make sure, and you don't necessarily need to do this on a daily basis, but connect it back to the business or talent strategy, right? So for example, I think Michael mentioned high attrition earlier. If you're turning over your entire workforce every 6 months, you don't need a 3-month recruiting process, right? So what may work and be ideal for one company may not make sense for you. And the second thing, and that's like the business answer. And then the people answer is don't underestimate how big of a deal this is to your candidates, right? Like some people may stay at a job for 5, 10, 20, 30 years. And so they may only go through this a couple of times in their life, and getting a new job's a big deal. They're telling their family, they're talking to classmates, they're talking to friends. And I think we get lost, especially when you get into bigger companies and you're recruiting all day, every day. It's another number. It's making sure the right assessment score and okay, you filled the seat, but don't forget that these are people, and these are big moments for them. These are huge moments for them, and you could be, hiring the next CEO of but the future CEO of your company, depending on what your talent model is, and so. It's really important not to, I think we got into a lot of data and a lot of tech, but it's also important not to lose the people element of it.
Yeah, that's all solid advice, you three. Thank you. And unfortunately, that does look like it's all the time that we have left for today. So thank you to everyone in our audience for joining us. And thank you to Michael, Da, and Whitney for sharing your knowledge. And also a huge thanks to our session sponsor, Eightfold AI, for making the event possible. And as I mentioned earlier in my introductions, this session has been approved for HRCI and SHRM recertification credits. However, you must be attending this session live, so today, April 8th, in order to be eligible for those credits. If you're attending this session on demand, unfortunately, you do not qualify. Our system keeps track of all of this, and those of you who watched live will receive a link to the codes via email in about 24 hours, so keep your eyes open for that. The same email will contain a link to our full recording as well. So be sure to tune in for the rest of this week's exciting events and resources. And thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.